All right. Can you guys hear me? Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, so hello everybody coming in from some number of thousands of miles away. What I'm going to talk to you guys about today is something which is it's not Solana specific, but it's certainly relevant to everybody in the audience. And I'm referring to it as L0. I claim that L0 is actually priority one, that it is legality is now more important than feasibility plus scalability, and that the legality layer is actually something that we need to prioritize and think about because legal code does not write itself. We need to think about this. We need to work on this. And it's just a reallocation of resources in some ways. And one way of thinking about this is that, over the last few years, we've been working on L1 and L2, but first let's define L0. Let's talk about how we change L0 and then go to specific steps. So key concept is the ideology enables the technology. So, obviously folks here know L1, a blockchain itself, and L2, where, Ethereum has tried to scale in L2 and has done so to some extent, and Solana tries to obviate that and just go directly there. And I'm not here to take any sides in that. I love all of my children and, investor in many of these projects, and obviously very, very bullish on Solana as well. But where I think is that we're somewhat over allocated in terms of attention and especially effort up over here. We've made a lot of headway here. I'm not saying, stop on that or whatever, but relatively speaking, we are under allocated to what I'm calling L0. L0 is the ideology layer. It is the ideas in people's minds and the locations of people's bodies. And this actually underpins all of this. And if we do it wrong, we get, this infrastructure bill. And if we do it right, we have El Salvador, and the world is in a very plastic state right now. And we need to put effort into L0. This ideology over here enables technology. It is a feedback loop. The technology also enables ideology. This has given us a realm and a budget from which we can influence this layer, but we need to influence this layer. So one way of thinking about it is the real full stack is not just computer software and computer hardware. It's not just, for example, the Solana code base and, the validators in data centers. It is the biological software, the ideas in people's heads, and the biological hardware, the presence of people's bodies. For example, everybody in Portugal now at Breakpoint. And the willingness to make edits at this level influences what can be done at this level. And it's actually ridiculously important for Web3, because if we think about, the progress from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, you can think of it certainly as a purely technical thing, where Web 1 was, peer-to-peer, basically symmetrical clients and servers. Web 2, we had MVC. We had, not just a single, obviously not just a tower, but a gigantic centralized database like a Facebook or something in the middle, with lots of clients connecting to it. And you had a model view controller model where all of these things were hitting that. In Web3, we can think of it as client, blockchain, client, where you have a centralized point of this blockchain, but it's served up in a decentralized way. So you get some of the best of both worlds, where it's kind of like peer-to-peer, where it's programmable and it's peer-to-peer, but it's also like the centralized model because you have the monetizability and global state that a centralized hub provides without the control and levers that has, right? So you can think of it as going from one client, one server, many clients, one server, many clients, many server. But this is just purely the technical look at it. The thing is that underpinning this, decentralized ledger backend are the ideas in people's heads and the presence of people's bodies. If we think about this purely as a software and hardware change, we'll lose. Because the backend we're changing out is not simply the software and hardware. It is mental software. It is philosophy. It is physical software. It is your presence. If you're not willing to move, if you're not willing to pick up stakes, mobility is the one leverage that a citizen truly has against the state. We will not actually be able to win. It is these two pieces, let's call that L0, the biological software, the biological hardware, the ideology layer. And this is essentially together what influences the legality, which is what influences this. And of course, as I mentioned, there's a feedback loop. The higher levels do influence the lower, but we have to influence the lower consciously. Okay, so call this L0. So how do we change L0? Well, basically, if you think about what the old information landscape was, very roughly, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, as well as academia and, NGOs and so on. This is like, basically we're like a board of directors vote. And if all three of them publish some negative article about, the guy who's the Secretary of the Interior, that guy loses his job. Just like if all three board members vote against a CEO, that guy loses his job. And this is the old environment, and it was essentially something where, the guy who writes the headline on the day of the election controls hundreds of thousands, millions of votes. And so, of course, they're very comfortable with that situation. It was essentially an informationally constrained democracy where the informed vote was based on your source of information, right? And this was very centralized. You had basically three, these three big newspapers. You also had three television stations: ABC, CBS, NBC. It's very constrained. Now, the new information landscape, everybody has a voice, with Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, millions of people out there are all, putting out their voices, especially, over the 2010s. And this resulted in a cacophony where modern political systems were predicated on the illusion of voice, not the reality of it. That's why there's a saying, never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel. The point is that, yeah, you might have had like one vote, but you didn't have millions of subscribers. You couldn't truly influence a public conversation. It was the illusion of voice, not the reality of it. True voice comes from having a newspaper, having a media corporation. That's where true voice comes from. Now, though, with everyone having a voice, there's this huge conflict. Everybody is arguing as to what should be done. The levers of power are now being yanked in this way or another. And so what happened? Well, the establishment essentially came with these arguments like free speech is killing us. And so academia and media arguing for censorship and to suspend you from, YouTube, for example, if you criticize the World Health Organization, even though they're wrong on COVID at the beginning. That's just like one egregious example. Everybody here has seen examples. But the point is they're trying to shut this down, this thing that is causing this cacophony. But what is coming next is actually the new information landscape where, I put a dashed line here because they aren't totally shut down. They're partially constrained. The censorship is growing, but there's also some resistance. But behind that is the next wave, which are decentralized social networks, social media networks. We put on their headline of decentralized media. And, intermediate forms are things like Substack, but the type of stuff that potentially you can build on Solana, also stuff like mirror.xyz, there's a bunch of these out there. These decentralized media networks give decentralized censorship resistance. And so you can think about the progression as centralized media corporations, pre-roughly 2016, 2010, depending on how you date it, social media era, 2016 on, decentralized censorship by corporations where it wasn't the government, but individual corporations that were being bullied or pressured or whatever to censor. And now we're going to decentralized censorship resistance via public chains. And so game is basically back on. Essentially, this is now armored up in such a way that these guys cannot push to censor it, and neither can these guys, neither can the Web2 guys. So this is the new information landscape. And, just thinking about that is, by building this voice, you can actually influence this over here. And this is kind of the war for minds that is happening. And, of course, it's not just happening in the US capital, it's happening in every capital around the world, as I'll get to next. So that is what L0 is. The ideas in people's heads. It's the presence of their bodies. It is, how do we change L0? We have to understand the information landscape and how it's evolving, and how what we're doing with cryptocurrencies and blockchains is directly changing that. We're armoring it up over here. We're making it censorship resistant, and that censorship resistance is influencing law, because this is downstream of this, right? It's really like, it's like 4 levels. We're going 4 levels. So once we understand what we're doing, what are we trying to do? Okay, what are the specific steps? How do we change L0? How do we change these laws and so on? So the first concept is we need to start thinking subnational and international, not national. So China, PRC is a no-go. I'm very sympathetic to Chinese founders in cryptocurrency, but they've all packed up their mining rigs and gotten out of town. We'll see a lot of amazing Chinese Web3 founders. In DC, a lot of people focus on DC, but in DC, at best, you can play defense. What we, at least today, what we need to do is within the US, if you are within the US, in Miami, in Wyoming, in Colorado, in New York City, in Texas, in all these places, and outside the US in places like El Salvador, Switzerland, Singapore, Dubai, we can make headway. Eric Adams is taking his first 3 paychecks in Bitcoin. Of course, Mayor Suarez was, one of the very first to do this. Singapore's ambitions to be a crypto hub. The N city system is more important than the 2-party system. We're moving into this world where you can have influence at the local and city and state level and the international level if you just kind of look past what everybody's focused on, which is DC. DC it's almost like a flypaper. It's a honey trap. You might say, well, isn't that the most important? But the thing is that at the local level and at the international level, you're increasingly seeing people defy DC. You're having states sue over education. You're seeing sanctuary cities for immigration. You're seeing variants at the state and city level on gun laws and all these other things. And at the international level, you're seeing Germany, for example, resist sanctions that were imposed by the US, and it's just trading with Russia despite that. You're seeing lots of things where DC is basically losing power over both domestic and international events. So thinking subnational and international, while playing defense in DC, I think is important, establish precedents locally and internationally, get footholds, move faster. So that's first concept, think subnational, international. Second concept, gain rough consensus within the constituency. So internal alignment comes first. That means minimizing partisanship, because Web3 has both Republican and Democrat supporters and opponents, frankly, and minimize crypto tribalism, prioritize big wins over Twitter fights. There's this concept of rough consensus and running code from the IETF, Breakpoint, the today's conference or the conference for the next few days is a great place to do that kind of thing. Gain rough consensus over what does the ideal law look like? Because it is not simply enough to be a critic of something that you see flashing on Twitter. The reason you're seeing it flashing on Twitter is that somebody else wrote the law. And it is basically something where we need, you might say learn to code. We need to learn to write legal code. We need to learn to write model legislation. So I'll come to. That's step 3. So write model legislation. Just like code, laws don't write themselves. You know who writes financial legislation? It's often banks. Sometimes it's hostile academics, like the so-called Stable Act. Usually it's not technologists till now. We're now starting to do this. A6Z has put out some proposals on Web3 policy. I've been, working, in India and Singapore and other places. But this is absolutely, a team effort. Some might say, oh, is there a door jam with everybody at the same time? Well, there's 190 something countries. There's 50 plus states. There's hundreds of cities worldwide. I don't think we're yet saturated on this. Somebody who speaks, a local language. That's the amazing thing about this community. We have people who are Russophones and Lusophones who speak Japanese and Korean and Chinese, who are in, like Africa and in Canada and Australia and everywhere around the world, right? And so we can and should run a parallel process, and not everybody's going to agree with each other, but we have a broad sense of the kinds of things that we want. And putting out that first model legislation on GitHub, people can fork it and they can edit it and they can customize it for different jurisdictions. And at a minimum, you're going to move the ball forward. Everybody can agree on certain basic things like buying Bitcoin should be legal. And then, like DAOs should be legal, things like this. You can figure out what your support is. You'll have 99% for this and 95% for this, at least within our community. And then you start advocating that, right? So write the model legislation or else the law will get written for you. Step 4, build distribution to avoid distortion. Now, Thiel's essays on this are actually pretty good. People don't get distribution. The reason is for engineers, product is merit, but distribution is connections. And so you're used to thinking about algorithms and performance and math and all the stuff that you can win on merit. But distribution is about, how you get your product in front of people. And just as an example, a bad product with terrible distribution, that's not going to go anywhere. But a bad product with great distribution is like a terrible article in a major newspaper. So it's a bad product that's got great distribution. Conversely, a great product with terrible distribution is an amazing blog post or article or video that nobody sees. Okay. It is not sufficient to simply build a good product. You need people to also see it. We kind of know this. And one of the things about cryptocurrency is it makes it easier for engineers to get distribution because you can just kind of code something good. And then the economic incentives will incentivize people to spread it. It's not completely a gimme, but it makes it easier. However, it is not simply about, the financial networks or the social networks. It is about the communications, the media networks. You have to actually generate content, make your case, and so on. So build your social media followings, build your own media outlets, build distribution to avoid the distortion of the establishment, and then use those distribution channels to get your proposed edits to those people who have root access, your L0 edits. Align with these technologically progressive politicians around the world, use the distribution to propose detailed edits to L0, and crucially, demonstrate benefit to all of society. Of course, you're going to be, interested in whatever cryptocurrency you have. Be honest about that, but try and make a mathematical case, a quantitative case, an empirical case to show how this benefits society at large, because that's what positive sum, that's what being honest and so on is about. And so concrete examples of this, there's what Jack Mallers did in El Salvador. There is, getting Bitcoin legalized there. There is what happened in Wyoming with the Dow law. Caitlin Long did amazing work here. There is what's now happening in Miami with Miami Coin. Patrick Stanley has done great work there with Mayor Suarez. These are three concrete examples of legalized Bitcoin, legalized DAOs, legalized city coins. Okay, those are effectively getting L0 edits at the legal layer to people with root using crypto to go and do that. It is the combination of the economic wealth that crypto generates and the set of ideas that are basically nonpartisanly appealing. You're actually generating revenue for these jurisdictions. You're improving administration with DAOs. You're making it easier for bureaucrats. There are nonpartisan benefits from this that should be thought about and, I shouldn't even say marketed, emphasized, right? We call it marketing, call it emphasizing. It is important to make the broad case, not simply, have fun staying poor and so on. That's funny, but you have to figure out how we can, WAGMI, how everybody can get wealthy together, how this helps other people, right? Okay. Finally, or second to last point, you have to think adversarially. Okay, a lot of the writing around Web 2 is only partially applicable to Web 3. One way of thinking about it is Web 1 was about technical risk. Can you build it? Will the thing even work? Web 2 is about market risk. With all the open source stuff, the LAMP stack, you could build it, but would they buy it? You could build this product, would people buy it? And Web 3, you can build it and people will buy it, but will someone ban it? It is now about political risk. And therefore, much of the writing on the last, 15 years-ish about startups is not actually as applicable to protocols and to crypto, because Web 2 competitors were companies, but Web 3 competitors are legacy media corporations, NGOs, academics, and regulators that are basically trying to beat you in an adversarial coding competition to get their edits into L0. Because they can't win at L1 or L2. They can't beat you in the market. They're trying to beat you in court, or they're trying to beat you at the legal level, okay? And there's much that can be said on this. I'm writing like a whole book on this stuff. But to first order, the answer is win on distribution, on the quality and quantity of your following. Quantity is obvious. It's like the number of people on your email list or following or whatever. Quality is arguably even more important, but it's less quantifiable. You'd rather have the CEO of this or the head of that on your email list than a random person, because quality of distribution, they themselves contain distribution. It's like a node. A CEO contains hundreds or thousands of nodes, like reporting to them if they flip a switch, right? So quality of distribution also matters, and you might combine the two to get your effective distribution, like the number of people you can reach. One of the important things that's happening is the mainstream press, the legacy press, has sacrificed the quality of their distribution. They've alienated so many people in the technology community, the founders and the funders, and instead they've racked up the folks who basically like infotainment, right? So they're just looking at their subscriber numbers that are going up, but they're not looking at the fact that the venture capitalists are tuning out. Okay, and so there's a huge opportunity here where these guys have declined in terms of the quality of their distribution. You can build quality and quantity and get those edits in at L0. Finally, be globally mobile. The whole concept here is that legal code doesn't write itself, but you're not going to win in an adversarial contest. You're not necessarily going to win every single battle. The fact that you can be globally mobile means you can basically go to where things are legal. And what that means is many things, but it means living simply. It means no Lambos. It means dressing inconspicuously. You don't want to go out in like fine garments on the street, also for security reasons, increasingly. It means, certainly you can have an office, that's fine, but rent rather than buy. All of those kinds of things, once you start thinking about your highest priority being to be able to pack up and get out of Dodge, if the law goes in a bad direction, once you move from thinking about the government to a government, once you start thinking about 50 states, 50 US states, 190 countries, and hundreds of cities, success is possible because failure is feasible. There's hundreds of millions of crypto users worldwide. The crypto regulation world map is dynamic and ever changing. And when you think about L0 as something which you might win or lose on, and if you lose the sale, you have to leave, you have to think, okay, we need to be globally mobile. And everything that you build, all of those things should be built with an eye towards being globally mobile. Don't have a large fixed plant. Now, one thing that helps here is it's not like we're mining, we weren't mining silicon in Silicon Valley, and we don't need, some spider web trees for the webs for Web3. We don't need the physical plant. Literally, all you need is a conducive regulatory environment with some degree of stability and, a Starbucks or whatever down the street. You don't really need something super fancy. If you're building validators and stuff, you're going to need power and whatnot. I agree that is a thing. But overall, the demands are actually relatively reasonable, and you don't need to be next to a gold mine or a port or something like that. You can literally be in the middle of nowhere. And that actually is very important because it means that the middle of nowhere could be the place that gives you effectively a safe passage, right? That passes the laws. Nobody expected El Salvador to put itself on the map like this. That is going to happen more and more, and you can make it happen. So just to summarize, L0 is priority one. We need to learn to code laws faster than they learn to outlaw code. And that's it. So L0, over L1 and L2. Want more? I am gradually writing a book. Subscribe at 1729.com to get it. Going to release a bunch of chapters. And that's it. Thank you.